All right, hello there, folks, and welcome to the next of your poetry videos on the Power and Conflict Poetry Cluster. It's Mrs. Gotham here today, ready to talk you through the poem Storm on the Island. So, Storm on the Island was written by a man called Seamus Heaney in 1966. And as you can see from the title of the poem and also from some of the pictures on this slide, it is all about a storm. So let's start off with some context on the poem, the background to it. So the first thing that's really important for you to know is that Heaney, who wrote this poem, is from Northern Ireland. And he lived through a Northern Irish conflict, which is sometimes also called the Troubles, which happened mostly between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. And these were based on differences between the two religions. Obviously, both were Christian, but they had some key differences in the things that they believed and disagreed with. But also there was differences between whether they wanted independence from Britain or not. So some people wanted Northern Ireland to be its own, to join with the rest of Ireland and be its own country. And the rest of them wanted to stay joined to Britain, as they are today. So Heaney lived through this, he experienced this, and no doubt it had a big effect on his poetry. Another thing that had a big effect on his poetry was also the fact that his father was a farmer, and Heaney actually grew up in the countryside. So a lot of the themes that we see in this poem, specifically about nature, can probably be traced back to the fact that he grew up in a very rural setting. It's also quite clever with the title of this poem to notice that the first 8 letters of the poem's title, Storm on the Island, spell out Stormont. So there's probably no mistake or no, it's not coincidental that it does this. This was a deliberate decision that Heaney made. And this is probably because Stormont is the name of the Northern Ireland's Parliament building. And you can see a picture of it on the slide here. So it's a bit like the Westminster House of Commons that we have in England. But this is specifically the Parliament for Northern Ireland. So Heaney, again, was probably referring back to the Troubles here when he was titling his poem in this way. So that leads us to the interpretation that actually the storm in this poem could have a dual meaning, which means it could have 2 meanings. So on one hand, it's about a storm on an island and nature, but also on the other hand, it also could possibly be about these violent political disturbances or storms, if you would like to call them that, in Northern Ireland when Heaney was living there and experiencing that. So very much that this poem has 2 meanings. And the level that you interpret it at will help you to get a higher grade if you're able to talk about both of these meanings in the poem. All right, so I should probably say now's a good time to pause the video and make some notes on the context slide here. So I'd suggest that you copy these down, but make sure that you put them into your own words to show that you fully understood them. So pause the video here and make some notes on the context of this poem. Right, folks, so thank you for doing that. Hopefully you've made some notes on the context section all about Storm on the Island. So let's move on then to what happens in the poem. So first of all, at the beginning of the poem, the speaker describes the island community, and they're preparing for a storm that's about to hit. But they think they're very well prepared and they think they're going to be safe in this storm. They have no worries at this point in the poem. As the poem goes on, the storm develops and their confidence starts to disappear. They start to become a bit worried and anxious that perhaps the storm will affect the island badly. And then by the end of the poem, the storm is really raging and the people on the island are feeling fear as the storm fully hits. But they also feel helpless, that all they can do is wait for the storm to finish. It's completely out of their control what the storm does and the impact that it has on their island. So they have no control over it. So as you can see, it's quite a short poem. It's got some key points here. So I suggest that you pause the video here and take a minute to write down some notes about what the poem is about. And again, remember to try and make sure that those are in your own words so that you've shown that you fully understand it. All right, so hopefully you've paused the video, you've made some notes on what happens in the poem. So I'm now going to read you the poem. So, Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. We are prepared. We build our houses squat, sink walls in rock, and roof them with good slate. This wizened earth has never troubled us with hay, so, as you can see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost. Nor are there trees which might prove company when it blows full blast. You know what I mean. Leaves and branches can raise a tragic chorus in a gale, so that if you can listen to the thing you fear, forgetting that it pummels your house too. But there are no trees, no natural shelter. You might think the sea is company, exploding comfortably down on the cliffs. But no. When it begins, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turns savage. We just sit tight, while wind dives and strafes invisibly. Space is a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. So that was the poem, Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney. I'm now going to go through some key quotes from that poem that you could use in your exam. But before we do that, I'll briefly talk to you through the themes of the poem. So you've got two key themes of this poem. We've got the power of man. So the key idea here to do with the power of man is that mankind thinks he's safe and secure and ready for anything nature can throw at him. The villagers at the beginning of the poem think that they are safe from the storm. They think they've built their houses in the correct way and built their land, farmed their land in the correct way, that they're ready for everything. But actually, that's not the case as the storm hits. And then the second key theme is the power of nature. So nature is frightening and powerful in this poem when the storm hits. And they can't fight the power of nature here. Its power supersedes or is more powerful than man's power. So just pause the video here and make some notes on the themes of the poem, and then we'll move on to the quotes. Right, okay folks, so hopefully you've made some notes on those key themes there. They're going to be really helpful for when you need to answer a question about this poem. So do make sure you've got some notes on those. So let's go on to the key quotes then. So first key quote we're going to use is actually the very first line of the poem. We are prepared, we build our houses squat, roof them with good slate. What can we say about this? Worth saying that after each bullet point, I suggest that you're pausing and making notes in your own words. So first of all, it suggests that mankind thinks they're safe and secure against the storm. As I said earlier, they think that they have prepared fully. And in this poem, you could argue that the storm represents the power of nature. It starts with a really strong opening statement to really show that sense of security and the fact that they really are feeling safe at this point in the poem. And the end stops at the end of this line shows and reinforces the sense of security. So remember that an end stop is where the end of the sentence comes at the end of the line. So here we've got good slate full stop, and that is the end of that line. So yeah, we've got a feeling here, they're absolutely sure, reinforced by the end stops here. And that feeling tends to be lost later in the poem when we move to more enjambment. So enjambment is when we don't have that end punctuation at the end of the line, but the line runs over onto the next line. There's way more enjambment in this poem than there is end stops. So that sort of shows at the beginning they're feeling secure with the end stop, and then throughout the rest of the poem they're feeling like they have no control, shown through the enjambment. So there's a nice structure point that you can make about this poem. It's also worth noting in this quote that we've got the pronoun we here. So when we use the pronoun we, we're usually referring to a group of people. So this shows that this storm and their experience of it is collective and it's communal, it's within the community. And this suggests that all of mankind think they're secure against nature, but they're not really. This isn't something that's just these people on this specific island that believe that they're safe against nature, but Heaney's making the point here that it's everyone that tends to believe this. So what does this quote show overall then? So it shows that mankind thinks it's safe and secure before conflict starts, in this case a storm, but it loses its confidence during conflict, in this case when the storm starts. Okay, if you've made some notes on that quote, then let's move on to key quote number 2. So we've actually got a range of different words here taken from the poem. We've got blast, pummels, exploding, and bombarded. So this, hopefully you might recognise, is a semantic field, which is when you've got a group of words that all link to the same idea. And here it is a semantic field of violence. All of these words are to do with violent things happening here. A blast, an explosion. And so through the use of the noun blast and the verbs pummels, exploding, and bombarded, which are all tend to be linked to war as well. So when you bombard something, you're attacking it. When you explode, obviously you have shells and artillery fire exploding in war and bombs. So why does he use all these words throughout the poem? These are words about war, and he's using them in a poem about a storm. So he's using these to emphasise how powerful, aggressive, and frightening nature can be. It's almost like being attacked in a war. And some of you might remember that it's similar in exposure, in the way that the nature is kind of attacking the men in the trenches there. And also it suggests that mankind has really little defence against nature. They think at the beginning of the poem that they're safe, but actually just in a war, many people and soldiers discover they're not safe. This is exactly the same here with the villagers realising that they're not safe. And then what does it show? Well, it shows us, as I was just saying, man isn't as safe as he thinks, and nature is actually frightening and powerful. Right, when you've made some notes on the bullet points there, get ready to move on to quote number 3 then. So quote number 3 is spits like a tame cat turns savage. So this is a simile. A simile, remember, is when we compare one thing to another thing that's similar to it, using the words like or as. So here we've got the spray of the sea and the rain in the storm being compared to an aggressive cat, using the word like. So what does this show us? It shows us that man has underestimated nature in this poem. And it also shows us that even familiar things, things that we would see in our everyday lives, in this case a cat, can become frightening and unsafe in times of conflict. And then there's an extra idea here that you could note down if you're going for higher grades, which is, again, we've got, as I mentioned earlier, the enjambment in this poem. Well, this is an example of a line that has enjambment here. If you've got a copy of the poem in front of you, you can see that after spits like a tame cat, turn savage is on the next line down. So this is why that's an example of enjambment. And that shows then that nature can't be tamed or controlled by man, and therefore we shouldn't assume that we're safe. Whenever we find enjambment in poems, it often links to this lack of control feeling in the way that the lines run over onto the following lines, and that's definitely what that's showing here as well. And then what does this show? Well, it shows us that, again, nature can be aggressive and frightening, and how man can, again, feel safe, in this case because something is familiar to them, the cat in this quote. Right, so when you've made some notes on that quote, key quote 3, let's go on to key quote 4. So key quote 4 is from the very end of the poem, it's the last line. It's a huge nothing that we fear. So at first, I suppose this makes the people sound quite foolish and silly. They've been afraid of something that they can't see, in this quote, the wind and the storm. And actually, potentially, it might not do anything bad to them. They might be thinking in their mind that it's going to be worse than it is. However, there's sort of a second interpretation here, which is also that man can't fight nature, because it's not something physical. The wind is not something you can hold on to. So therefore, it's not something that you can ever really control. The villagers can control the way they build their houses, for example, but they don't have any power over nature and what nature does. In this sense, it's unstoppable. So what does this show? Well, it shows again that man can't fight nature. We're completely at its mercy, regardless of how prepared and safe we might feel we are. Really, we're all the villagers in this poem at the mercy of the storm. All right, so when you've made some notes on that quote, if you want to keep watching, I've got some extension ideas for you if you're aiming for higher grades. So first of all, well, you might say this is already a quote that we've had. This was key quote number 4. It's a huge nothing that we fear. And that's true. But there is an additional interpretation to this quote that is really useful to talk about if you're going for higher grades. It links back to that idea that I gave you at the very beginning of this poem, that actually the poem has 2 meanings. Yes, it's a storm on an island, but also this link to the idea of islands conflict when Heaney was writing. So this quote could very much be interpreted as linking to the religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. And let's remember again that Heaney experienced this, so it's quite likely it influenced some of his poetry. So what could Heaney be suggesting here about the troubles in Ireland then? Well, he could be suggesting that they were fought over a huge nothing, or not very much. Maybe he's commenting to us that the difference between Catholics and Protestants were not actually as large as people thought they were at the time. Let's remember that this is essentially the same religion. Both of them are Christians or Christianity. So they both believe in the same God and the same set of principles, but the way they go about it is different. But perhaps Heaney is commenting here that they've made too much out of this religious difference. But you could also suggest that this conflict in Ireland led people to be fearful of each other. But actually Heaney's saying that they shouldn't have been. And that could be the huge nothing that he's referring to here. They shouldn't have been so fearful of the people that they were living with or living around. So multiple different ways we can connect this quote to the troubles in Ireland. So what does this suggest overall then? Well, it suggests to us that minor differences and disagreements can violently escalate into senseless conflict. So often it's small things that kick off bigger conflicts. And we see this with lots of examples in wars as well. Maybe you've seen it in history, that quite often it is small things actually that begin the first spark of a conflict. And that could be what Heaney's arguing here as well. And that these small things, if they're allowed to grow, can cause unjustified hostility between people. It's not necessary for there to be this conflict. All right, so when you've made some notes on the additional interpretation of that quote, I've got a second extension quote for you from the poem, which is exploding comfortably. So you may have already recognised that this is an oxymoron. So an oxymoron is where 2 opposite words appear side by side. In this quote, we've got the verb exploding, which has connotations of violence and war. Again, this idea of a bomb or a cannon fire or something like that. And then that is right next to the adverb comfortably. Now, normally when we're comfortable, we feel safe, we feel secure, we feel relaxed. So the fact that these words are next to each other, they are completely opposite from one another. And that is an example of an oxymoron. So why does Heaney use an oxymoron here then? Well, it juxtaposes or contrasts, that's another word for, the initial safety the villagers felt at the beginning of the poem, when they were preparing for the storm, and then the later fear they experience as the storm actually hits. And it also shows that nature can terrorise and attack man without much effort on its part. The fact that it is exploding comfortably shows that nature finds this easy or sort of a relaxing activity to do, attacking this island. So again, it shows us about the power of nature here. So overall, what does this quotation show us then? Well, again, it shows us that mankind thinks it's safe and secure, but actually it's not. And we've got the juxtaposition here, exploding and comfortably, to show us that. All right, so well done if you've made it to this point in the video. Where can you go from here? Well, I suggest the next thing you do is search out the GCSE pods on Storm on the Island to find out a little bit more information about this poem. And otherwise, I hope that this video is useful for helping your understanding of Storm on the Island. Thank you very much for watching.